All right, so we're looking at 5.5, compare and order rational numbers, which starts on page 387. Just by the title, I hope that you see how relevant it is to the 5.3 lesson that we had just done. So real world length, it says the lengths of several common types of insects are shown in the table. Which of the insects is the longest? And then shade in each fraction strip to represent the lengths of the fire ant and a housefly, which is longer, the fire ant or the housefly. And then how many of the insects are longer than 0.5 inch? And then order the lengths of a housefly, a green June beetle, and a fire ant from the shortest to the longest. I want you to go ahead and look this over and see if you can do this on your own. Pause the video now, and when you come back, I'll have the answers. All right, so for number 1, the longest is the cricket because it says that it's 1/1 for the length in inches. So 1/1 would be 1 inch. And that's the biggest one out of all of them. And then shade each fraction strip to represent the lengths of the fire ant and the housefly. The fire ant I did in the turquoise here, and then the housefly I did in the peach. And so you can see that based on those numbers, and I could find common denominators too, but using this fraction strip, it's easy to see that the fire ant is actually bigger than the housefly, which I was kind of surprised about. All right, then how many of the insects are longer than 1/2 of an inch? 0.5 is 1/2. You have to remember that. So I just went through and I circled the ones that were bigger than 1/2. So 3/4 is bigger than 1/2 because I knew 2/4 is 1/2. So 3/4 is bigger than that. So that's where I got this one and this one, the June bug and the June beetle and the firefly. Which, if you guys have never seen a firefly, they are so pretty. I love them. And then the mosquito, 4/8 would be 1/2. So 5/8 is bigger than 1/2. 1/2 is not bigger than 1/2. 1/4 is definitely not bigger than 1/2. 1/3 was the tricky one, but you had to think about what's half of 3. That would be 1.5. So 1/3 is not as big as 1/2. And then 1 out of 1, of course, is a whole number, and so that's bigger than 1/2. So 4 insects altogether. And then number 4 said order the lengths of the housefly, the green June beetle, and the fire ant from shortest to longest. And so I took the 3 fractions and I put them all with common denominators, and then I put them in order based on that, from shortest to longest. So this was my shortest, then my next shortest, and then my longest. All right. So compare decimals and fractions. Positive and negative rational numbers can be represented on a number line. You can use a number line to help you compare and order rational numbers. So we talked about that with our positive and negatives. Now we're just talking about it with decimals and fractions included. So fill in each blank with the less than, greater than, or equal to make the statement true. We've got negative 1.2 and 0.8. Remember what we talked about with the positive and negatives. Basically, if it's negative, and if there's a negative and a positive, then the negative is the smaller number. End of story. It doesn't matter what numbers those are. This could be 0.000000001, and if this is positive and this is negative, the negative is always going to be smaller. So that's pretty easy. Just pay attention to the sign. If the sign is a negative and positive, boom, the negative smaller. Okay? The next one, though, shows us where we have 2 negatives. So you actually really do have to look at this closer. Remember that in negative world, it's opposite world. Okay? So negative is opposite world. So the bigger the number, opposite world, opposite. How about we take away some of those? Opposite world, that the bigger the number, the smaller it is. Bigger the number, smaller it is. Okay, so negative world, the bigger the number, the smaller it is. So when I've got negative 1.4 and negative 1.25, they're both negatives. We're talking the same world, right? In negative world, the bigger is the smaller. So think money, $1.40 or $1.25. $1.40 is the smaller number. Does that make sense? You can also fill in the number line thinking of this, the way that they did their number line here, if these were temperatures, right, we've got 0 up here and then all our negatives down here, that the farther away from 0 you go, the smaller your number is. So remember that as well. Number 3 now gives us fractions, and it gives us -3/8 and -5/16. I can't compare these. It's great if you can use mental math somehow to figure these out. It's great if you can figure out halves and see based on halves. We talked about estimating based on halves before, but both of these are less than 1/2. If one was bigger than 1/2 and one was smaller than 1/2, maybe it would be a little bit easier, but it's not. So I need to find common denominators. And with 8 and 16, 16 is my common denominator. And remember, guys, that the only reason I'm even going this far is because they're both negatives. So I really have to look at the numbers for real this time. So I get common denominators. I end up with -6/16 and -5/16. And remember, the bigger the number in opposite world, the smaller it really is. So that's why we give it a less than. All right. So you're going to do A, B, C, and D on your own. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about it. So go ahead and get started. Pause your video now. All right, so I hope that A was a really fast and easy one for you because you should have noticed right away that there was a positive and a negative. So obviously the positive is a bigger number. Then B, unfortunately, we have to look a little deeper into it because they're both negatives. And remember, in negative world is opposite world, so the bigger the number, the smaller it is. When I make them both into the same amount of decimal places, $4.50 and $4.49, $4.50 is the bigger number, which in opposite world means it's smaller. So that's why it's less than. For C, they've given us common denominators, whoop, whoop, and they're both positives, whoop, whoop. So now we just need to figure out which one's bigger. So 9/16 is smaller than 12/16. Letter D is both negatives. Okay, so we're going to have to figure this out. They give us tenths and fifths, so I knew I needed to find a common denominator. My common denominator is 10, and so I end up with -7/10 and -8/10, which the bigger the number, the smaller it really is, so -8 is going to be the smaller number, so it's greater than. -7/10 is greater than -4/5. So least common multiple, we want to find the least common multiple of the 8 and 16, which is going to be 16. So just reviewing that least common multiple, still happening, did not go away. All right, so compare and order rational numbers. To compare and order rational numbers, first write them in the same form. So, okay, I've got a decimal and a fraction. They're both negatives, so unfortunately I can't just jump into it and say, oh, positives are always bigger, you know. That's not happening here. They're both negatives, so I actually have to figure out what do they both mean, which going back to when we did repeating decimals and terminating decimals with negative numbers, top dog in the doghouse. I need to divide. I need to do 8 divided by 15, and let's do that over here. 8 divided by 15. Add my decimal point and my 0. Let's say 5, and that's going to be 75. Get a remainder of 5, so I need to add another 0, drop it down. Now that would be 3. That's going to be 45 with a remainder of 5 again. And now that I see that's going to happen, that's going to be a repeating 3. So this I'm going to call -0.53 repeating. So if I'm comparing it, negatives, decimals, 2 decimal places, I've got 51 cents and 53 cents. 53 would be the bigger number, but in opposite world, it's smaller. And so the answer is greater than. Let's try another one. So this time we're going to put them in order. And they've given us a decimal and then 2 fractions, or 2 mixed numbers, I should say. They're all negative. So already I know I don't have an easy answer here. I need to actually work for it. I need to make them all into decimals, or I need to make them all into fractions with common denominators. As always, back when we talked about fraction decimals and percents, I always went to the decimal. rather than fraction, because common denominators is just like another step on top of everything else. So if I have my choice, I'm going to go ahead and make this all into decimals. So the nice thing is that for the negative 2 1/10, that's easy to write as negative 2.1. The negative 2 and 22 25ths, 22 over 25ths can be made into a denominator of 100 by multiplying times 4, and so that's going to be 88 hundredths, so it's going to be negative 2.88. And then we've got our negative negative 2.46. Talking money, I'm going to think about this as $2.10. It's all in negative world, so the bigger it is, the smaller it really is. So going from least to greatest, let's make sure we always read our directions. We're going to start, least to greatest is actually the biggest number, so that's my $2.88, so my negative 2 and 22 25ths. Notice I'm going back to the original form, not the one that I changed it to, because I don't know what negative 2.88 is. I gave you negative 2 and 22 25ths. All right, the next smallest number, again, thinking money, in opposite world, the bigger the number, the smaller it really is. If I'm comparing between my negative 2.46 and my negative 2.10, negative 2.46 is next, and then my negative 2 and 1/10 is the last one. And so that's going to be my order from least to greatest. All right, so how could you represent negative 8.3 feet is deeper than negative 5.7 feet? So how could you explain that it's deeper than negative 5.7? Well, it's further away from 0. The further away from 0 it is this is 0. This is our this is ground level, right? This is 0, and I've dug down, oops, sorry about that, and I've dug down 5.7 feet, that's like negative 5.7, right? To go even deeper, to get to 8.3, that means it's even deeper, because in negative world, the further away from 0 we go, the smaller the number is. Well, in this case, when we're talking about digging a hole, it's the deeper it is. Just kind of all is relevant. So you're going to do E, F, and G on your own. So please pause the video now and try this on your own. I'm really excited to see if you guys get it. Unfortunately, there's no gimmies in this one, so you're going to really work for it. Pause now. All right, for E, I had to do top dog in the doghouse, and I found that it was going to be negative 3.625, which is equal to negative 3.625. So that was equal to. For F, I did the same thing, top dog in the doghouse down here in green, and I divided, and I found that it was going to be 0.428, blah, blah. It was going to keep going. Honestly, as soon as I saw it was 4.2, and this is 4.1, let me change colors. As soon as I saw this was 4.2 and this is 4.1, I knew that I could stop, but I wanted to get one more just so I had the same amount of decimal places, and so I could compare my 0.428 and my 0.413, and I know that 428 is bigger than 413, and so that's the way I went with greater than. Then, because those were both positives. Then for G, I had negative 7 and 13/20ths, which I changed to negative 7.65, and then my negative 7.78 I left alone, and my negative 7 and 1700ths I wrote as negative 7.17. It's going from greatest to least. Remember that negative world is opposite world, and so the bigger the number, the smaller it actually is. So looking at my decimals, $7.78 is the biggest number, so it's the least. And so I went in that kind of order where I went from smallest to biggest, but in the opposite world, negative world, it was actually greatest to least. So negative 7 and 1700ths, then negative 7 and 13/20ths, and then negative 7.78. So number 6, Mr. Plum's science class is growing plants under different conditions. The table shows the difference from the average for some students' plants. Order the differences from least to greatest. So we've got Ricky, who has a difference of 3 1/4. Debbie, who went negative 2.2. Suni, or Sunny, went 1.7 positive, and Lenora went negative 1.7 tenths. 1 7/10. So we want to put it in order for the differences from least to greatest. Now, obviously, the biggest negative number is going to be the smallest. And so if I look at just my whole number, I've got -2 and -1. My -2 is going to be the smallest number, so -2.2 it is, Debbie. And then the next one is -1, because it's the only other negative number here, so -1 7/10. Then I've got my two positives, which if I'm looking at it, I've got a 3, a whole number 3, and a whole number 1. Obviously, the 3 is going to be the bigger number, so the next number in line is going to be 1.7, and 3 1/4 will end it off. That one's kind of easy because we can just look at those whole numbers. In negatives, we put the negatives together, and then positives together, and put them in order from least to greatest, and we have a go at it. So that ends our 5.5 lesson on comparing and ordering rational numbers. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in school.